All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is another edition of Mic Drop here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now, and this one a special edition of the show because I have somebody who's made some waves recently, especially recently in the media circle, but also previously made some waves as a member of your Pittsburgh Steelers. I am your host, Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined for this show by Bryant McFadden, two-time Super Bowl champion and football analyst with CBS Sports. Brian, definitely appreciate the time, first off, for sure. I know you're a busy man, and this is kind of a little bit of a weird world we're living in. You got the jerseys behind you, so I like the background, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Mike, man. Yes, we're all going through the same situations right now, the unfamiliar situation. So I think we're all a part of the same team. We're wearing the same colors.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I will say platforms like the advancement of technology like Zoom and things like that make all this possible. So as I told somebody recently, even the first week when the quarantine order and the stay-at-home orders hit, everyone's binge watching shows, and I'm sitting there saying, I'm covering sports, I'm covering the NFL. I'm actually busier. That was like right before the NFL draft. I was like, I don't have time to binge watch anything. I'm busier than normal. So,
Yeah.
They're kind of business as usual in the National Football League, and especially with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But I wanted to have you on, not just because you won 2 rings with the Steelers and you're doing it big in media, so that would obviously make sense. But I think the fans especially want to hear your recent takes because I've been following along and caught you on Twitter. And number one, to start things off, you had, I don't know if I'd call it a bold prediction, but maybe it's a bold prediction nationally speaking in terms of what you thought of the Steelers this year, what you thought they're going to do. Maybe someone throw a homer tag on you because you did play for the team, and that's the team you're most associated with. And this is a team that, despite the roster, let's be real, they did miss the playoffs the last 2 years, and the team that won it has the reigning MVP. But what do you expect from the Steelers in 2020, regardless of whether fans are there and how the season's going to be? If games are played, how do you expect things to go?
I think for me, if the Steelers are healthy, they will be a playoff team. And the reason why I feel that way is, just from the quarterback play alone. Last time we saw Big Ben play a healthy season, he threw for 4,000 yards.
I think it was over 5,000 even. Yeah,
over 5,000 yards. I'm sorry, I shortchanged Big Ben. Over 5,000 yards, 30-plus touchdowns, playing top-tier football. And then in 2017, he didn't throw for 5,000, but I think he threw for like around 4,000. You know what I mean? So he had 2 big-time years back-to-back. And then, of course, with the injury that occurred last year, you didn't get a chance to see him, basically give the trifecta. So I think if you have a healthy Big Ben, being able to get right back into that top-tier-like form, along with what he has surrounding him, in the backfield, a healthy core wide receivers. I really love the wide receivers. I think this could be a dynamic group. I mean, you talk about 3 or 4 guys that you can get the ball into their hands at any given time, and they can do some good things for you. I think these young guys can really go. I mean, so then defensively, that's why I'm so hyped about this team. We saw the defense last year carry the ball club. And yes, they lost Hargraves, big-time contributor.
Yeah.
But the other members that are returning are real good football players, highly invested football players. Some people, for us being a part of the Steeler Nation for such a long time, we have not had the luxury of having highly vested players, but we almost have a starting group of all first rounders.
Yeah.
On the defense, right? And these guys are living up to their billing. They're living up to their draft spots. And then you got a guy like Vince Williams who just, he does it all. He's not a highly invested player, wasn't a highly drafted player, but still playing real good football. So in all, when I look at the entire roster from top to bottom, and yes, they're chasing the Baltimore Ravens, but don't forget the first ball game in Heinz Field with Mason Rudolph, the starting running quarterback, and then getting knocked out of the ball game. That game goes into overtime.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So when you factor in the defense and then having the health on the offensive side, yes, I like the Steelers to win the division, especially when you look at the odds. I think it's plus 370. You can get a nice return on your dollar if you put something on the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, betting-wise, I think it's definitely a solid pick. I actually would even think it's a solid betting-wise pick to even maybe a deep playoff run, depending on how things go. And, of course, health is a major factor. Now, everybody knows about the defense being so star-studded, and they definitely did carry the team. I mean, it's hard to even argue that the offense would agree. Mason Rudolph had a famous press conference last year saying that he actually felt bad that he was letting down the defense because they're playing like the 85 Bears, is how he put it. That got national attention. So that was the case, and unfortunately that may even have cost some individual awards for TJ and a few others based on that team not getting in the playoffs. And people do forget that there's an extra playoff spot now that wasn't there last year and the year before. And actually, if that was there the last 2 years, the Steelers would have crawled in, even with the drama of 2 years ago, and Tomlin would have never missed the playoffs, as weird as that is. So that's an extra factor. But what you touched on the offensive side of the ball, that kind of will segue into, I feel like that's also where there's the most pressure on individuals, maybe not even on the Steelers, but in the entire National Football League. I mean, JuJu Smith-Schuster and James Conner are two guys that I could argue and have argued have the most pressure on them of any players in the league. They both got to get it done. James Conner has yet to get 1,000 yards rushing, even though he's had some injuries. JuJu wants to say he's an elite receiver, wants to prove that. He wants to do it without AB there taking the double coverage and him doing it. And last year wasn't getting it done. Do you feel like that is maybe more of the quarterback play? Not to knock Mason and Duck, but they were backups with no experience. Do you believe that JuJu and James Conner, or what do you expect out of the two of them? I see the workout videos on IG. Everyone's going to look like a Hall of Famer on Instagram on a workout video. You got to prove it on the field. They certainly look in shape, but they have tons of pressure on them. And as much as there's depth there, if those two guys don't get it done, it's really going to hurt everyone else in terms of falling in line. Because as well as Deontay Johnson played last year, to have him be a number one, he might not be ready for that yet. It does need to be JuJu to have that depth chart roll out perfectly.
Yeah, I think, both guys. Let's talk about JuJu first, right? Yeah, not having Big Ben really hurt his numbers.
Okay.
The rhythm wasn't there. He wasn't able to give the production that we've grown accustomed to seeing from JuJu. But if you're number one wide receiver, whoever's throwing you the football, it's your job to make them look better.
Right.
And we didn't really see that last year. And then, of course, he started to get hampered with the injuries, and that kind of, hurt his chances, limited the opportunities, and he had a disappointing year. But now the pressure is on JuJu because this is year 4. I don't know the extent of contract negotiations with the Steelers and his representatives, but clearly I haven't heard anything with the Steelers trying to give him a handsome ransom going forward, right? So now it's almost like you have to prove to this organization that you can be a number one guy and you can be consistent like a number one guy.
Yeah.
And me personally, I think he has that skill set. He's a talented player, but earlier in his career, he was playing in the shadow of Antonio Brown, right? And AB was an elite wide receiver. So anytime you played against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it was about stopping 84 and making everybody else beat you.
Yep.
So the person who had all the pressure was 84. Now when 84 leaves, when AB leaves, guess who receives the pressure?
Yeah.
19, right? And it's up to you to stand up to be a number one wide receiver. So this is a critical year for JuJu, along with, being a critical year for the offense, because like you said, if JuJu is playing real good football, the offense is flowing. The other wide receivers, now they're eating as well. But if he struggles, the passing game potentially could struggle because he has to be that number one guy. He needs to be that number one guy. And then transitioning to James Conner, it's kind of the same format that I spoke, that I just referenced towards JuJu. When James Conner was, quote unquote, filling in for Le'Veon Bell that year, we all thought at some point in time Le'Veon would return. So it was like James Conner was just babysitting the position until Lev Bell comes back. But he didn't.
Yeah.
So now the following year, Bell is gone. So guess what? Now you're the guy. Now you're the number one guy. And defenses went about they prepared for James Conner that way. And the same thing I talked about with JuJu, more significantly with James, has been durability. Durability. I mean, you can't make the club in the tub, and you can't be a factor in a tub. Yeah. And I'm not saying that he won't make the team. No, I'm just saying that's football. It's a cliche regarding football, but he has to be healthy, bro. He has to be healthy. So, and also too, I just talked about the lack of contract talks that we've heard surrounding JuJu. It's the same thing with James. I haven't really heard anything about Pittsburgh trying to get a deal done, or they would like to get a deal done. And we know, you think about the organization in Pittsburgh, they don't negotiate with non-quarterback players during the season.
Yeah.
So if they don't get something done now, both players are going into 2020 under this is their last year. So I think not just kind of hearing the lack of contract talks with both players tells me this organization wants to see you live and be productive like a number one guy at your position for our ball club.
And I think that the way the media is today, with everybody having some sort of an outlet, even us being credentialed, having ins and outs and sources all over the place, and you being a former player, having more potentially, to hear nothing is definitely telling. I mean, there really is no tea leaves to be reading, except for the fact that just what we all know, they're not giving money away. And it might be unfair, but what just happened with Antonio Brown is certainly going to be in the back of the mind of the Rooney family, that they're not just going to be giving this cash away to somebody who either can't get it done on the field or they have any concerns with it all. And maybe there might even be more pressure on James Conner, potentially, just for the fact that I was an advocate. I don't know your thoughts prior to the draft, but I was an advocate of them going ahead and trying to trade to get Leonard Fournette, especially with the fact that he wasn't traded. They probably could have got him for a fourth. There was rumors of a sixth. If that was possible, I would have done it. They ended up drafting Anthony McFarland, which we've touched on Steelers Now on Pittsburgh Sports Live a bunch, and he has some burst. But having a guy like Leonard Fournette could provide you that support if Conner would get hurt, to step right in and be a 1A. Didn't happen. So, again, if Conner goes down, that's going to potentially cripple the offense. I don't know if anyone's ready to step into those shoes. So tons of pressure on those guys. I'm glad you said that, though. You kind of corroborated with what I've been saying. So if nobody wants to listen to me, they get the support from what you were saying. Again, Bryant McFadden here, two-time Super Bowl champion and, of course, football analyst with CBS Sports here on this edition of Mic Drop on Pittsburgh Sports Live and Steelers Now. Now, the other end of it is the defense, which you mentioned. That carried the load so much last year. It was kind of a shame they didn't get into the playoffs. And that defense, even if they play half to that production, is going to carry this team through some semblance of contention this year. You maybe won't get what happened last year, but that defense was so great last year. It's almost kind of underrated what they did. But one player who kind of is the focal point for the turnaround for that Steelers, because I remember being there in the press box in that Jacksonville playoff game, and that defense let the entire offense down, regardless of the trauma. And a year and a half later, this guy's on the squad, gets traded from the Dolphins over a first-round draft pick as well, number 11, back out of Alabama with the Dolphins a couple years prior. Minkah Fitzpatrick comes over and is a turnover machine. He's a ball hawk like Troy used to be. There was records in terms of most consecutive games, grading turnovers and things like that, and really changed the course of that defense, even for players like TJ. But you have a colleague, Pete Prisco, who got some attention as well, got some buzz, that I'm not going to say he wasn't impressed, but he wasn't nearly as impressed as most people. Didn't rank him on his top 100, didn't really put him in terms of where the respect that most people feel he should be. Number one, what are your thoughts on Minkah's season and what your colleague kind of thought of it? And then I did see you gave some advice to Minkah, because I think that's big, that this is still a young player. This will be his first full year with a team that's actually trying to be good. He didn't have that situation in Miami, and they didn't get in last year. So hopefully the chatter doesn't get to him too much.
Yeah, what I think about Minkah is that he's a playmaker, and I think we kind of got caught up in his first year and a half, almost year and a half in the Miami Dolphins uniform, about the type of playmaker he was at Alabama. What he did at Alabama, I mean, basically almost made him a top 10 pick. He was right outside the top 10.
Yeah.
11th. He was a difference maker from start to finish at Bama. And then he goes to Miami, and they're trying to figure out how to utilize him. And the playmaking ability dropped off. So people kind of forgot about him. Forgot about what he could do to help a defense. And then the trade happens. And then people started to really criticize the trade. Like, wow, you gave him a first rounder for Minkah Fitzpatrick? A guy who hasn't done anything in the Miami Dolphins uniform? Potentially, he could do something, but we haven't seen it. But don't forget, the entire Dolphins organization was bad. There was nothing that was positive from Miami at that time on either side of football. And you saw a lot of players leave Miami and go off elsewhere and play real good football. Kenyon Drake, for an example, right? So I don't think it was more about the players. I think it was more about what they were trying to do and the uncertainty on how to use some of these guys. So Pittsburgh goes and gave up a first rounder. Some people felt like that was a bit aggressive, but they had a plan in place. And we saw that plan come to fruition, right? Being able to utilize Minka as a free safety, being able to have him play in space, which is huge for his success because he's very, very instinctive. So when you're dealing with an instinctive player, you want them to be in space to be able to use their eyes to put them in positions to be successful. And that's what we saw. And I think the ceiling is extremely high for him now, getting ready to be with this team from start to finish. He got traded during the season. So what people don't realize, if you've never been in a huddle, you've never been traded, when you get traded, it's not just an individual change. It's a family change. It's a cultural change. You go from living in South Florida to getting traded during the season about Pittsburgh, probably not knowing anything about Pittsburgh. You got to find a comfortable means of living. Then you got to get adjusted to new teammates, new coaches, understanding the defensive philosophy. And they do a lot defensively in Pittsburgh week in and week out. So being able to get comfortable from that standpoint, and then also being able to make the chemistry show on the football field. He did that instantly. And the numbers proved that Minka made a good defense great last year.
Yeah. And I do think also with that trade, it was a little bit of an eye-popping trade just because Kevin Colbert, early in his career at least, and there was tons of success, was a bit more conservative. He would just ride with the dudes that were there, and it was no way in the world was he changing course no matter what was done. And there's a little bit of, I don't know if it's towards the end of his career or what, but a little bit of I don't give a, Kevin Colbert now that we're seeing, and it is getting aggressive. But I also think that argument was put to bed in this coming draft because you saw all the safeties slide out of the first round, most of the big ones. The Steelers had a needed safety. They would have drafted a safety probably being their first-round pick if they didn't have Minka. And there was nobody there that's better than Minka right now. You still have years of control with him. You're not really paying him yet a big contract, so we'll see when that comes up. But I think that really does solidify that trade working regardless, and that was more than just last year. Because the other criticism was, well, you make the trade a week after Ben gets hurt. You're probably not winning a championship with two guys who hadn't played prior. And they didn't. But it now brings into Ben hopefully being back, or Ben is being back and hopefully playing at an elite level, and Minka playing so well. Now, Brian, what I want to get you out of here on is Mike Tomlin. He's made some comments recently, and I guess these are out there, and there's nothing to do to fix this. I know Kevin Colbert made comments prior to the draft that he wanted extra rounds, and oddly enough, the Steelers have been more vocal than other teams in terms of, and they may feel this way too, but the Steelers have been uber vocal in terms of the weirdness of this offseason and how it may affect this coming season. Tomlin's concerned about the rookies. Tomlin's concerned about the rookies not having a rookie minicamp, where last year we got to really see a lot, especially from the mind of Devin Bush. He's concerned those guys are just not going to be ready, and he's not going to get much production out of them this coming year because of COVID-19. Number one, are you expecting this to be this coming NFL season and maybe be a year where we don't really see a standout rookie because they didn't get the work coming into the season, and maybe that will influence whether he will rely on them like he did last year with Deontay Johnson and company? And how big of a deal really is that as a former player, that if they basically go into a smaller training camp and then right into the season, how could that realistically screw over players going to new teams or being rookies coming out of the draft, or even Minka, who is an elite player, but you talk about a full season, and with Ben, he might not again get a full season of actual work prior to the season with these guys.
Yeah, I think to start the season off, especially if it starts on time, that we will see maybe some issues with some rookies. Especially, it depends on the positions. Luckily for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they draft Chase Claypool in the second round, and he's in a real nice spot on the team because you have veteran wide receivers that you can rely on. We talked about JuJu, James Washington. This will be year 3 from him. Deontay Johnson, who I love. I think he has an opportunity to be a real difference maker for the offense. I consider him to be the best route runner on the team. You have him.
In terms of the separation numbers, he was better than JuJu. In terms of if you really want to get analytic and separation numbers, he was great for a rookie, especially.
I didn't dissect the numbers and all these analytics and things like that. But just from my football eye, when I watch him run routes, he's a polished guy.
Yeah.
Just with him being so young, he's the best route runner on the team. He's a smooth route runner. But like what I was saying with Chase, he's in a situation where you don't have to force him into action if he's not ready. You know what I mean? You can simplify things to put him in positions to be successful and knowing what to do without having the normal off season to get him adjusted. Our wide receivers we're okay wide receiver wise, right?
Yeah, we're trying. Yeah.
And we could be okay not really seeing Chase show up big time until midway through the season. I think James Washington, year 3 is going to be huge for him. It has to be huge for JuJu, and I think it will. Deontay is going to be I love Deontay. And don't forget about Eric Ebron.
Yeah.
Right?
That's big. I think that actually might have been the best move of the entire offseason for any team in the NFL, just for the fact of what he's getting paid. Tons of money for the average folk, but if you look at Jimmy Graham's deal with the Bears, I mean, he's getting – Eric Ebron's 6-7 years younger, getting less per year, and is just a stud. So I think he's going to fit perfectly in.
So you add him to the passing attack. Okay, so now, Chase, take your time, and when you're comfortable, we're going to throw you into the mix.
Yeah.
So you got to look at the pass catchers, man. Right now, Eric Ebron, Red Zone Nightmare, really started to find his way. Remember, he struggled early on from North Carolina at Detroit, but Indy really helped him, establish confidence. And I think it will continue to establish more confidence with Big Ben. JuJu, Deontay, James, okay, we're okay. You know what I mean? And now having healthy Big Ben, yes, this offense is going to be entertaining to watch. But when you look at the vets, some newly vets, right, that go to different situations, the thing that they have on their side is experience, right? They understand what it means to be prepared mentally for an NFL season. They understand, they know what they have to do physically and mentally. A lot of these rookies, you're stepping to uncharted waters because you've never done it before. Like Eric Ebron, yes, he might be a bit behind, but he's a vet. He's a vet. You know what I mean? He understands, okay, I might not know the playbook like the back of my hands, but these are the things I need to really get prepared for. Talking to the coaches, the vocabulary, understanding, the reads and the hots and things like that. He's done it before, and he's been a part of different NFL offenses. You know what I mean? Detroit, Indy, and now Pittsburgh. So he's familiar with this task. A lot of rookies, my rookie year, I'm happy that I got a chance to have mini camps and OTAs because there was the opportunity for me to see how NFL defenses work, the difference from an NFL defense and a collegiate defense. And then by training camp, I felt like I was where I needed to be. These guys don't have OTAs and mini camps. So, yes, they will be behind. But for Pittsburgh, it's not like we drafted a first-round quarterback who needs to play right now. It's not like we drafted a first-round corner who needs to play right now or first-round middle backer who needs to play right now. We drafted a wide receiver who yes, we would like for him to give us production, but if he don't in the first 2 or 3 months of the season, we should be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. No, the Steelers do have a luxury that they didn't really have last year. There's depth there that if they even have some injuries, they could still mutter around. And, I'm not necessarily a fan of adding this extra playoff team, kind of waters things down, but it's there. So it's the reality. So there's now an extra spot to get in. So that's going to be big. You're going to have critical rivalry games as well. Brian, just to get you out of here on this, you touched on one more thing I wanted to get your thoughts on that's been a big conversation this offseason. The Steelers, you mentioned, did not draft another quarterback. There really wasn't anybody really to peg as the future guy when they would have been drafting, but they also didn't bring anybody in that's an established veteran. And Kevin Colbert has made the comments that he actually saw progress in Mason Rudolph last year, and Mason Rudolph is the guy if Ben goes down, it appears, and he has some confidence that Mason Rudolph can putter them through some weeks if Ben would go down again. And Ben is older, so it's not a 0% chance that Ben could certainly get hurt again. He's missed time recently. Mason, for his faults, and it certainly wasn't dynamic, certainly was not a dynamic offense with him in there. He did struggle to move the ball, but they did go 5-3 with him. So is that a concern to you at all that they didn't bring in a veteran? Would you have liked to see them maybe bring in a Jameis Winston, even though there's a lot of mistakes with his interceptions? Would you have liked to seen them throw a flyer to Cam Newton, who's still out there, if he would take less money? Or Brian Hoyer was signed by the Patriots. Maybe him if he didn't have the connection with New England. Would you have liked to have seen that, or is that not a big deal?
Yeah, I would if the price was right. I think because the National Football League is a little different. It's a different vibe right now. Certain positions, you need to have a reliable backup to be successful. And the quarterback is one of those positions. Now, when Mason first took over for Big Ben, he was playing winnable football. And then when he got concussed against Baltimore and then returning, he never looked the same.
No.
And I could imagine.
Yeah, then you had the Myles Garrett incident a few weeks later.
Yes,
he had to go through a lot.
So he never looked the same prior to returning after that Baltimore injury.
Yeah.
But still, do you believe he can get back to being the player that he was before the injury? And that's what the Steelers are rolling the dice on, because not actively trying to go get a veteran quarterback to be the backup to Big Ben. And it's not just about being the backup to Big Ben. What about life after Big Ben?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, right now, if you look at what we've seen from some of the quarterbacks that are the new backups for their respectable teams, I would say, and I'm just, based on what I've seen, right? Jameis Winston would have been a better backup option than Mason Rudolph.
Okay.
Right? Nick Foles would be a better backup option than Mason Rudolph. And depending on who you're asking, one would say Brian Hoyer, right? Clearly, Andy Dalton would have been a better backup option than Mason Rudolph, but it goes to what the organization feels about the particular player. And for us, we're on the outside looking in, so we don't get a chance to see Mason do his work 7 days a week. We just see game day. And like I said, before that injury, Mason was playing good football. And even when he returned, he was a bit up and down, but like you said, they were 5-3 with him. So clearly the organization believes that, number one, Mason can do a capable job for them if needing to go into the ball game. And they also believe that if Big Ben decides to call it quits sooner than later, this is the guy you're going to have to rely on in Mason Rudolph. Now, like I said, we're from the outside looking in, so we just got to trust that the Steelers, they know what they're doing. And granted, best case scenario, we only need to see Mason in garbage time because we just blew somebody out. That's what we're thinking anyway, right? Just because that means Big Ben is healthy the entire year.
And really, honestly, and I've said this to people too, and this was the case last year in all reality, that if Ben goes down and misses, say, to throw out a number, more than 3 or 4 weeks, you're not winning a Super Bowl. I mean, if he ends up in the middle of the season in November, out for the year and no playoffs again, then it doesn't matter. I mean, I honestly don't feel like I know Nick Foles has done it before, but I don't know if any of those other guys are stepping in. But I get what you're saying about continuity.
Would you feel that way with the example you just provided us? If Ben goes down and Jameis enters into the lineup in November with half of the season left to be played, with everything surrounding him, would you still believe the Steelers wouldn't have a shot of making the playoffs if you had a backup like Jameis?
My only pushback on it, because I get what you're saying. I certainly, as a quarterback to quarterback, Jameis is better than Mason Rudolph. He has a higher ceiling. He has a higher upside. He certainly had more success. And talk about 5,000 yards. He threw for 5,000 yards last year. My only concern would be that sometimes with your backup quarterback, or if you can't have your starter in there, you'd rather at least have a guy who's not going to kill you and not going to make tons of mistakes for you. And when Mason started declining, and after that injury, he started maybe being more careless with the football, making some mistakes. And the king of mistakes the last few years is Jameis Winston. I mean, he would agree. That's just a fact. 35 turnovers last year, 5 fumbles, 30 picks. There is a higher upside for sure, but there is also a risk that he would try to revert back to what he was in Tampa, try to do too much, and then those mistakes would be there again, maybe more than even Mason, and then potentially kill the team. That's my concern. That would be my pushback on Jameis Winston, why I wasn't so thrilled about that conversation, because the one issue with Mason and Duck were turnovers, and that's something that Jameis Winston did better, or I guess worse than anybody else, at least last year.
And also, too, one thing we have to factor in is that this has not been the normal offseason. So,
right.
Usually in the month of May, you're seeing guys on the grass, so you're hearing about the progress some guys are making. Yes, Mason has been a part of the organization for quite some time, and this will be year 2 for Duck, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But they still need experience. So we were just talking about, you asked me the question about how would this offseason, this offseason affect rookies. It affect players like Mason because they need reps. You know what I mean? They need reps. Duck, they need reps. So these are guys that are being affected by the difficult offseason that every player is going through right now.
I think with Mason, too, and you're not going to have this happen, obviously, in training camp. They're not going to want to do this, but he might need to get hit. I mean, he's not been the same guy, and people wanted the handcuffs taken off of him, and then you have that hit in Baltimore. You have the incident with Myles Garrett. Then you have the offseason where he's being accused of different things and Tomlin having to defend him. He went through a roller coaster ride for 3 or 4 months, and it almost seems like he needs to make sure that those cobwebs aren't going to be in his head during games, because it certainly appeared like he was worrying about who's going to be coming from this side, what's going to be happening over here, especially after the Garrett incident. And depending on people's beliefs, he might be a target for defensive players around the league. So that could be another issue that we'll see what happens. Yeah, I mean, honestly, for the future too, the ceiling might have been higher. I guess what I'll say is life after Ben, because Jameis is so young. The only thing that it could have sold me on bringing Jameis in would have been there's probably a higher ceiling if you could get in there and convince him to stop trying to do too much and make all those mistakes, that for after next year and for the year after that, if you could have him here for a few years, he might have been able to be the guy of the future, where I don't see it in Mason. I don't see it in Duck. Even not even fair to really criticize them. They hadn't played prior to last year in the NFL, but I don't see it in either one of them. Maybe could see it in Jameis. At least he had some success. I mean, they were a prolific offense, even with all those turnovers. If you would cut his turnovers by 10 last year, they would have made the playoffs for sure. And we're now going to see what Brady with the same team he had, I'm figuring, making less mistakes. Well, I definitely appreciate the time for sure. We'll have to do this again sometime. You were all over the national scope there, so you had a good few weeks there with either your colleague or some comments you were making. I'm sure Steeler fans are going to be thrilled to hear from you. We'll definitely have to do this again.
Yes,
and
sir.
Stay well, and definitely appreciate this, man.
I appreciate you for allowing me to join you.
All right. Well, have a good day. I'm going to get on the golf course here, so have a good day.
Have fun.
Yeah. All right, man. That was Bryant McFadden, two-time Super Bowl champion, and, of course, football analyst with CBS Sports. This has been another edition of Mic Drop here. Hit us up on social, PGH Sports Live on Twitter, Pittsburgh Sports Live on Facebook, and SteelersNow.com on the site, and at PGH Steelers Now on Twitter. You can find him all over CBS Sports, and you can also find Bryant McFadden on Twitter at BMac_Sports Talk, and myself at Mike Asti 11. So have a good one until we meet again.